so the question then becomes, how do we recognize deeply and profoundly that we are powerless over our addiction to our culture? I was joking earlier that we should have T-shirts printed up that say, "This culture is making me sick," right? Because it is. Culture is actually not only is making us sick, but has made us sick, and has been making us sicker and sicker for the past 12,000 years. Sicker and sicker and sicker, doing crazier and crazier and weirder things until now we've become almost suicidal as a species, with pouring more and more carbon into the atmosphere, more and more pollution into our waters, spreading human monoculture, of course, across the face of the planet, so that we are thoughtlessly and mindlessly destroying other species that actually enhance and sustain our own lives and give us longevity as a species. And so the question becomes, how, again, do we admit that we are powerless? It's not that, how do we become powerless? That's the interesting thing. People will hear a step like this and they will think, well, what do I, how do I tap into that? But it doesn't require that. The word is admit, admitted that we were powerless. All you have to do is look honestly at those aspects of your life that are unmanageable. If you want to know where they are, look at the places where you defend yourself. Look at the places where you self-medicate. Look at the places where other people have criticisms of you. Other people have resentments for what they say is your bad behavior, ill behavior. Don't ask yourself how you feel about it. Ask yourself how they feel about it, and look for a trouble spot where your life is unmanageable. From there, all you have to do is just like dropping a stone to the ground. All you have to do is relax and release that uncontrollability and to see where it falls, and it will always fall directly to earth, because at root what you're responding to is life out of harmony and life out of balance with nature, even though it appears to be about something else, even though it appears to be about other things. Really, at bottom, what it is living out of harmony with your very most basic needs as a human being. When the Buddha came along and he discovered the Eightfold Noble Path and the Four Noble Truths, he said that life is suffering, and suffering is caused by desire. This is what he meant. Suffering is not caused by needs. The earth fulfills our needs. The earth we are designed in such a way that we fulfill the needs of the earth, and the earth fulfills our needs. That this is everything about our minds and bodies, our being, is designed to feed and to be fed by the earth. And these are our basic, most wholesome, most foundational, connected and rooted needs. Our desires are another matter, and our desires we only learn from one another. We don't really have any desires on our own. We only have needs. We have needs that can be met. Desires we learn from another. There's a reason why it says in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, right? Your neighbor has taught you what to desire. And you see what your neighbor has and you want it. You want what your neighbor desires, because something about that promises greater happiness or greater fulfillment or simply more. It takes you a little bit further away from the reality of your own limits and your own connection directly to this time and place. It's a kind of a fantasy or a vacation. Because invariably what happens is the guy leaves his first wife, marries the second wife, ends up in the same marriage. Right? You know the Flitcraft story? Has anybody ever heard that? The Maltese Falcon, Dashiell Hammett. Famous digression, often discussed by philosophers. And it's been endlessly argued, does it belong in the story, or did Dashiell Hammett just lose it momentarily and say, I've got such a good story, I just got to get it into this novel somehow? And people are divided. Some people say it is the essence of the whole novel, and some people say it's completely gratuitous, but nobody argues that it's a brilliant story. Marlowe, the detective, goes to see the femme fatale. I can't remember. Everybody remember what her name is in the Maltese Falcon? And he tells her the following story. He says that a year or two earlier, a woman, a Mrs. Flitcraft, had called her and said that her husband, who had been missing for 2 years, had been spotted in Spokane, Washington, and would he travel to Spokane and locate him? And so Marlowe agreed to do so. And when he arrived, he had no trouble locating Mr. Flitcraft, whose name had changed. Okay, and Flitcraft told him the following story. He was a very successful car dealer. He was leaving his car dealership one day, leaving from work, and he was walking along the sidewalk, and a steel girder fell right in front of him, missing him by inches. And a piece of the sidewalk flew up and nicked him on the cheek, leaving a small scar. And at that moment, he decided not to go home. He decided to move to another city with the money he had in his pocket and start over. And Marlowe says that he touched the scar almost lovingly as he talked about it. He said that he was suddenly free. He said it was as if the universe had lifted the lid and shown me the works. That's what he felt, as if the universe had lifted the lid and shown me the works. And he says, I was living in a world where a steel girder could fall and crush you in an instant. And so he moved to another city. And then Marlowe leaves you hanging there for a moment, and he says, but that's not the best part. The part I always loved was that Flitcraft now sold real estate. He was married to a woman who, while she didn't look exactly like his wife, looked much more like her than not, living in a house that, although it was not absolutely identical, was closer to the house he had lived in than not. He had jumped a groove only to fall back into the same groove, though he thought it was different. Isn't that a wonderful story? Called the Flitcraft episode, or the Flitcraft parable. And then he goes on, and then shortly after that the crime is solved and everything is wrapped up in the book. The question becomes, how do we, rather than jumping the groove only to found ourselves in another groove, how do we really achieve freedom? How do we achieve the real freedom to act and to love in the world? And I think going forward we'll discover that that the architecture for that is contained in these 12 steps and the 12 traditions which accompany them, which I do believe are a portrait of the modern Bodhisattva mind.